Hi everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, Connecting Communities Through Events. I'm Kristen Johnson, Local Arts Advancement Program Manager with Americans for the Arts. We've got a great program planned for you today, and I'm excited to introduce our speaker, but first, a couple of quick reminders. First, ArtsU is our e-learning platform offering a variety of training options to support your work in the field. Be sure to visit artsu.americansforthearts.org to view more upcoming events. Second, there will be time for questions in the second half of this presentation. However, feel free to type any questions that you may think of in the moment into the chat box in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. I just said hi to everybody over there so you can see where that chat box is. Just know that we may not actually, Sarah may not actually get to answer your questions until we get to the Q&A portion. So with that, I'm pleased to introduce our speaker for today, Sarah Rucker. Sarah is a lifelong arts lover and advocate with 13 years of experience in arts research, programming, and presenting. She is the founder of Full Gallop, which offers event production, community engagement, and artist consulting services. She has a personal mission to help increase equity in the arts, especially in Austin, where she recently started the Inclusion Riders Initiative, ATX. She was also a founding member of the Austin Emerging Arts Leaders from 2013 to 2019. And now I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Sarah. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Kristen. Thank you all for joining us today, and thanks to Americans for the Arts, especially Kristen for all of her hard work on this webinar series. As she said, feel free to post any questions, and we'll definitely have time at the end to go through that and discuss. Also, please know that any terminology I use is mostly my own usage of words, so if clarification is needed, you can also raise a hand in the chat box and we can discuss that a little later. So just a little bit more about me. I am first and foremost an arts advocate. I am a dancer, a trained dancer with a BA in dance from the University of Texas, and started working in the music business in Austin in 2004. So my specialties as far as presenting and programming my own events are in music and dance fields. And then I've held jobs within nonprofit arts organizations as arts administrator, marketing person, promoter in the music business, and a number of other things. And as Kristen said, I was a co-founder of Austin's chapter of the Emerging Arts Leaders. And a little personal note, I'm a huge Janet Jackson fan. So a personal mission statement is a concept I heard of a few years ago, and I thought if I was working with so many nonprofits, I should develop my own stated mission. So mine is to work to bridge cultures and build community in every facet of my life and my community. So just to reiterate what we're going to be talking about today and what we will touch on, the main topics we'll cover is how to cultivate relationships through events, how to hire the right person to produce your events, and how to gauge and monitor success after said events. So starting with community outreach and building relationships to form future partnerships, I'm going to take you through 3 basic steps of starting this work before you even start to plan an event. So first, I think it's always really important to define the terms you're using with your team, and you know, especially when we talk about equity, diversity, and inclusion. But to me, one of the most important words in my work is community, and that can mean so many different things. To define if your goal is to connect and build community, then you need to define it. So I use this word in different ways myself. Sometimes I use it more broadly and say my personal community is the Austin arts industries and everyone in that industry. But when I'm doing event planning and community engagement, I have to narrow that definition to achieve my goals and be able to correspond clearly with my team. So this is kind of just, again, a personal definition for me. and kind of a rubric for the types of programs and events that I produce. Entertainment value is extremely important to me, and that's always kind of in the forefront of my brain as I'm planning and producing events. But to me, engagement is even more important, because if you can't foster relationships and bridge communities, then you're not achieving that engagement. And the success of future events depends on your connections to your community. So again, some things to consider before you rush into declaring that you will be hosting an event or planning an event. What are your reasons behind that? So there's some, obvious ones. Entertainment value, as I mentioned, in educating audiences, informing them of art forms that perhaps they weren't introduced to before. And then engagement, which I already mentioned. Promotion of your organization or other programming, or even promotion of a sponsor that you're working with. That can be a reason and a type of event. And then support both of your organization, financially of your organization, or support to gain mission awareness. And then most importantly for this webinar today, what we'll be talking about is connecting with and growing community. Okay, so now we get to, you've discussed and researched and determined that you will be producing an event. Sometimes I have a caveat here. Sometimes you're not ready to produce an event within a program or a research project. You're just not there yet, and to rush into that could halt progress and success and community engagement. But also sometimes you just don't need an event to achieve your goal if you have other ways to engage and build relationships. So again, these are kind of some of my own definitions for categorizing different types of events, and they're kind of personal to my own work, of course. Community events are accessible opportunities for people to come together. It's sort of a lot of what I do in Austin and in the state of Texas. Low barrier for entry, meaning low ticket costs. Often the venue choice is accessible in a variety of ways, and the programming itself is a variety of art forms and offerings. Then private events becomes more exclusive, maybe a higher ticket cost, invite-only list of people attending. The venue itself is sort of more private, so think of your galas and your fundraisers and different things like that. And then promotional events. There's a lot of different things that could fall under this as well. You could be showcasing a sponsor or showcasing certain artists that you want to present, but they're not part of your larger program per se. And this is to create awareness and sometimes promote a future event. This example, this graphic here, was from something I helped with several years ago during South by Southwest, which is a Copyright Alliance event, and they wanted to have presence at South by Southwest and gain awareness of their mission, and so hosted a small event that was also kind of private, so you can cross, those categories. And then just clarifying the difference between presenting and programming, which many of you are familiar with, but I'm going to be using a lot of those words today and don't mean to interchange them, but presenting, as many of you know, is different from programming in that it's more focused on the curation involved in event production. For instance, this photo is American Folklife Center has the Homegrown series in which they invite state folklife agencies to present featured artists. There's also events such as the APAP conference in New York that are geared towards this specific field of presenting. And although presentations often don't include other facets like programming out in the community, presenters can conduct outreach and have a vast knowledge of the audience that they're developing for the shows. And then finally, programs are usually a larger, more planned effort. Could be an annual, ongoing effort that helps to push the mission of the organization, and can include events, can include a series of events within them, but and different formats. So just some examples, things that I've worked on that fit some of these categories. Texas Folklife is a statewide nonprofit based in Austin that works to preserve and promote the diverse cultural heritage of Texas, and I previously was on their staff as program and events manager for several years, and now am serving as a consultant and directing one of their long-running annual programs called the Big Squeeze Accordion Contest. This program works to find the next generation of accordion stars through a series of community-based events. It's 21 and under, so it's an educational event. We're working with schools all over the state. Just a lot of different partners and different facets. There are within this program upwards of 12 separate events, but through those events and through other formats of workshops and dialogues, we're really trying to engage communities and build long-standing relationships with the young people and their teachers and their parents. So another event that I have had the honor of working on here in Austin is called Cherrywood Art Fair. I have a brief video here that tells about their work.
What Chula League is doing for the Maplewood School, they are developing new artists.
I worked with this little artist named Carolina.
They're actually supporting these kids so they can sell art at the following year's fair.
It gives kids another opportunity to see the world from a different angle, that you can be a creative person and still find a way to be successful.
Artists are local artists from Austin.
There's a sort of vintage thing about the school.
People from the elementary school and people from the neighborhood.
It's just a really cool way to see everyone from Austin, all around Austin.
So I want everybody to feel really special when they're part of this. And I think to do that, you have to be part of the community.
It's like completely a community event.
My little artist right here.
So there you see a little bit about that event. Now in its 18th year, this is an annual winter art fair produced by a small nonprofit called Chula League. And though the art fair is an event itself, what I would consider an event rather than a program, it serves to the educational programming of the organization both financially and promotionally and educationally. Because any proceeds from the art fair go to fund the Little Artist, Big Artist program, which is the other big program produced by Chula League. So it's a great example of connecting audiences and communities. And that video was made a few years ago, but kind of shows like the partnership with the school. It's hosted at a school, local school in the Cherrywood neighborhood. And so connecting neighbors and students and all different types of communities from around the state, actually. And then this is a great project that I, again, was privileged to be a part of, the Celebrate Six Square project. So this was a creative placemaking project funded by the City of Austin and the National Endowment for the Arts. And it's also an example of a program that at this point in time has had very minimal events. So Six Square is also a nonprofit based in Austin that works to promote the East Austin neighborhood once known as Six Square. It's Austin's Black cultural district. And a cohort was chosen after this NEA grant was received to do research and community outreach for the creative placemaking grant and to determine next steps, including wayfinding signage, and eventually events will be produced. But at this point, no large-scale events, just small community-based meetings to gather input of how to best connect with the neighbors and citizens of this district. So much like any relationship in life, there are keys to building new relationships and bridging former relationships with new ones to create community or to build on community when you're creating programs and events. So obviously, listening, communicating clearly is very important. Supporting individuals and organizations that you would like to work with by attending their events and letting them know that you understand and support their mission. Finding common ground and moving into opportunities that are going to benefit both of your organizations so that you can work into the first steps of collaboration and even co-production of events and programs. And finally, in relationship building and community outreach, you get to, again, what I mentioned earlier, something that some people may rush into and deciding you want to do an event and jumping right into the planning and the details. That's something I recommend getting to after you've done all this other work to connect with individuals and organizations. So there's several skills to look for when you are ready to start planning an event and you would like to hire an event producer. This quote by Leonard Bernstein, "To achieve great things, two things are needed, a plan and not quite enough time." That is to say that planning an event with a tight time frame is an extremely difficult task if you're not working with a skilled event planner or producer. And so many of you have seen this next graphic, which is a Venn diagram that's been used to explain hiring graphic designers and other contractors. This is kind of a nicer version than most on the internet because it doesn't have any curse words in it, but it kind of reiterates the note to think of when you're hiring someone onto your team to produce an event, that you should choose two of these. Expecting something for high quality, tight time frame, and low budget is really like finding a unicorn. So, and then the previous quote that we saw by Leonard Bernstein kind of serves as an example of getting something good and fast, high quality, tight time frame. So finding an experienced producer, finding someone that you know you can trust your event with and can work well with your team. Early in my career, I was commended for my logistical skills and my ability to handle a lot of details at once. However, I feel now what I can contribute as an experienced producer is the intuition and empathy I use to anticipate scenarios, select the artists I'm working with, develop audiences, and try to conduct more diverse outreach and really help the organizations that I work for grow their mission and the meaning of their programming. So knowing what tools to use and when is a huge trait of an event producer. Sometimes, yes, it is a literal toolbox of knowing what items to bring for every event. And to me, a really important thing is customer service side of things. As I'm sure you'll all agree, someone that's a lot of times you'll hear people saying that event producers are able to stay calm amidst chaos, but to me it's more important to stay courteous and just stay respectful and never waver in your respect for your colleagues and especially your audience and your patrons that are attending. And then a good event producer plans for the worst yet expects the best of their program and events, and this means again, kind of a bad rap that event producers I feel get is they come off as kind of these worst case scenario people, but that's their job. So that if they plan for everything that could go wrong, then you know that they know how to make it 100% right for your organization. And then finally, someone that's a really good leader. You may decide that there is a different structure for your team and that event producer is not managing your staff or managing a larger team of production assistants, but in either case, they need to be a leader because you never know when something is going to shift in the middle of an event, and you want to be able to trust that person to clearly communicate what to do next. So working amongst the team, but also being a great leader, very important. And then here's some secrets for you all. I'm not sure if everyone is representing organizations or individual artists or contractors today, but number one, ask for help. Events are not easy. There are often a lot of hours put in. If you have someone already on your staff that it serves in this role, they're often 90 to 100% of their position is working to produce events, but it's almost always a full team effort, as you know. So just asking for that help as early in the process as possible to include the producer in the conversation so that they can be aware of all goals and possible challenges so that they can start to come up with those solutions. And then designating the roles of the team and the production team and keeping that team as small as possible. This is one of my personal preferences that I'm often working with the executive director of an organization, and then of course there's a board of directors who needs to be kept in the loop, but making sure that it's clear what their roles are in that team and that the producer is in charge of XYZ, the director is in charge of these approvals, and the committee chair, for instance, is just extra help or kept in the loop. Just designating that ahead of time so everybody agrees. And then reiterating that the day of the event is something I found really helpful to do, especially with my nonprofit clients. We convene the morning of an event to reiterate the roles amongst the leadership team. For instance, you'll have the executive director go up on stage and introduce the MC and introduce the organization, say hello. That director is also the main person to be schmoozing in the crowd, trying to connect with donors and board members, so on and so forth. And then the producer is the main contact for any show questions, and then the staff, the rest of the staff can be helping at the info table, for instance, things like that, just huddling up the day of and saying, this is what I'm doing today. I just want to be clear on that. It's always helpful. Now getting into, as you have completed your event, how do you look back and know that it was a success, and most importantly, that you were connecting with the community, if indeed that's your goal? So I would say make sure to track all of these different types of measurements. Of course, conducting surveys, counting how many audience were there is always important, but what's something I consider more technical. You're going to need that for grant reporting and a lot of other data input. But again, if you're goals are to make connections and form stronger partnerships, then you want to get into evaluating those new or strengthened partnerships and conducting convenings and meetings with individuals that you've worked with and or have met. I mean, even if it's an audience member that you met at the very end of this process, schedule a meeting with them to talk about their needs, talk about their observations. And then finally, really noticing a positive change or shift in the community, again, can be done by conducting these convenings and evaluating community impact and future needs. One tool in one of the projects that I mentioned before that I work on that has tracked in a little more technical way the impact of a program is this interactive map. This can actually be found, I believe, on TexasFolkLife.org's website. It's an interactive map that tracks every contestant of the Big Squeeze contest throughout the 13 years of its duration. And in those 13 years, the staff has traveled this large state of Texas, and over 350 young people have participated in over 55 cities and towns. And then you'll see some wide open spaces that don't have as many points, contestants in them, but there has been outreach and research done in those areas. So, you know, constantly connecting with people, whether they're coming to you or not. We're looking for accordion players and trying to foster that in these areas. We're just not producing events there yet if there's not a need. So kind of to summarize some of these points, timelines are key for the full team to follow along and for producers to report to directors, for example. But one thing that I'll leave you with is to try to be okay and understand when producers are suggesting shifts to deadlines. That's another thing when you move from straight event production into community engagement and program development, is not rushing conversations and being okay with a little flexibility. A structure is needed, as I said, for your team to follow, but sometimes that perfect partner you need is just now being introduced to you. So that's something that an event producer that's experienced in arts programming can bring to the table. And so finding that person that fits your team, that understands your mission and your goals that you've determined, and encouraging yourself and your team to go out and attend other events so that you are not replicating anything that's already been done, especially within the community that you're targeting. And I'd just like to close with another quote from one of my idols, Gloria Steinem, who said, "Without leaps of imagination or dreaming, we lose the excitement of possibilities. Dreaming, after all, is a form of planning." Okay, so now we have plenty of time for questions, comments, discussion about some of these things we talked about today, about events and community engagement. I'm going to ask Kristen's help in curating that.
Thank you, Sarah. So just to give everybody a couple minutes to think about any questions that you might have for Sarah. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to type them into the chat box on the left-hand corner of your screen. I'm just going to get things started to give you guys a couple minutes to think about what you might want to ask. So one of the things that you talked about kind of early on in the presentation is actually really thinking about whether an event is the right type of community engagement for you or your organization to be to be doing. So I'm curious whether you might have any examples or kind of any guidance of when might a time be that you wouldn't want to use an event to engage a community, and then what other methods of community engagement might there be? Or might be an alternative.
Yeah, yeah, great. So a perfect example, which I kind of touched on, and I did mention that one program that I was involved with the organization Six Square, is a really bigger conversation to be had. So just kind of getting more into that example. This is a historically Black neighborhood in Austin. The history of why it was called Six Square was part of a institutional racism in the history of the city of Austin. So this organization has been developed to promote that culture and preserve as much as possible in the face of gentrification and many other big issues. So in receiving something like a creative placemaking grant, you're still very early on in your program development, and that is kind of my best example for when an event, especially kind of a larger one like a festival or something, first-year festival, is not, you're not ready to do that, because so many conversations are needed. If you decide like, oh, the best way to get a lot of people out here and get them all together and see if they enjoy what we do is to produce a music festival, without having those conversations first, you could have a variety of disasters on your hands. So that's why I just really stress in community engagement, starting conversations. I always, any event production process I start with is with research and getting to know people. You know, what I just mentioned a few minutes ago, what has been done already, what type of events were successful historically in a certain community, and just, I mean, getting to know people, going to their offices and meeting the directors of different organizations, making lists. Every event that I work on, no matter how small, I have a contact list. And for bigger programs like the Big Squeeze Accordion Contest, we have, you know, a database of partners and noting, you know, the level of engagement. So those are just some little tactical ideas for how to start that process instead of rushing to do an event if you've just started your program development.
Thank you. I think that's a really great answer. I'm a resident of Baltimore City, and as you were saying that, I'm reflecting back on some ways that the arts community actually engaged the general community following the uprising that happened a few years ago. And as you're talking through that, I'm like, oh yeah, that did happen. And it was ways that were not events. So it just, you had that little light bulb click with me. You know, you guys can't see it, but it did go over my head. So Lisa has a question. She's wondering, under measures of success, what are ways to measure the effectual success? Meaning like how or if there's a community shift, especially if an event is new or is geared towards a smaller niche. So for example, the accordion players that you talked about, you know, what kind of success indicators were you looking for with that group?
Yes, that is a great example of something that we could evaluate effectual success. It was, I will say, it was very difficult in the first 5 years. So, you know, there are ways to see if change has been made in 1 year, but with that example specifically, it's been around for 13 years. Obviously, like I said, we have databases and tracking spreadsheets and things to show how many contestants entered through the years, but it's more than just numbers, as I mentioned before. It's more than just counting your audience and counting how many people enrolled in a contest or a program. But really, are these art forms being preserved and holding on their own. So that program specifically really mimics the mission, the overall mission of the organization to preserve and promote the cultural heritage of the state, but they don't want to be dependent upon. And so, you know, after the Big Squeeze program comes to a certain city or community, after that, are they hosting accordion lessons? Are they having their own events? I mean, so with that, we've seen like similar contests pop up. And all of those things to me are measurements of effectual success because they're sustaining the art forms on their own. And it wasn't just an organization that came in and said, this is fun and this is important and here's the way to do it and wait for it to happen again next year. It's growing on its own or through community partners that are within that community after the organization left, for instance. Did that help,
Great.
Lisa?
Thank you. Yeah, Lisa, if you want any more clarifying information, feel free to throw it into the chat box over there. And remember, if you have any questions, again, in the chat box for you. So in the meantime, Sarah, I'm going to throw another question in your direction, just because this is something that has been coming up a lot in conversations in various places that I've gone through my travels. And it's along the lines of who's actually a part of the conversation and kind of at the table when you're doing community engagement planning and going through the process. So it's kind of a two-part question. So the first is, how do you know when somebody is missing from that table? And then once you have identified that that person or group of people are missing, how might you go about inviting them into the conversation?
Wow, yeah, that's a really important step and question to ask yourselves as you're starting this work. Again, I would go back to research phases. You know, let's say, for instance, go back to the accordion contest example. These are genres of music that have a noted history. So first, kind of tracing that back, if you're starting a program such as an arts preservation type of program, what did it take to build that history? Who were the individual players, I mean actual musicians in this case, who has written about that historically, who are the scholars, you know, creating those research lists and who is still around and available. All of those people should be at the table when you introduce yourself to that community and want to help and want to engage and want to build upon that. And then knowing or recognizing once you start meeting with people who is not at the table. Another great example I didn't mention, but I did some work in one of my previous positions with an arts PR firm here in Austin, was with the city of Marfa, which I don't know if anyone's heard of. It's a small, really small city in West Texas that's known as kind of an arts community. And so we were hired to do a marketing campaign, but it was really ended up being more of a community engagement effort. And so we were just introduced to the community by the city, and very quickly, quickly, like within a year, realized who the people that were missing, because you know, someone has to kind of be leading these efforts and inviting the people, and if that person doesn't know, they don't know. So, but what you'll find is that you're having these conversations and questions keep coming up. So that's when you know someone's missing.
Great, thank you. So Meredith says this question is pretty specific, but we've been wondering how involved do you think that the marketing section of a local arts agency should be involved in producing an actual event?
Well, I mean, with everything I said, you know, the different roles of producers, obviously you modify that to fit your team. And I would say always, you know, identify strengths and weaknesses in individuals with your staff and not necessarily go strictly on the departments and what their historical definition are. But generally, to me, I worked at mostly smaller organizations, but marketing teams are important in the branding of the event. The communication often is within the marketing department. So they are in the loop. Like I mentioned, kind of an example of a leadership team of an event would be the event producer would be the main contact, but the executive director would sign off on all major approvals. And then perhaps like the chair of the marketing committee is involved. That could also be the marketing director of an organization. So, but usually that role is not guiding decisions from an event production standpoint, but they are always in communication so that the message and the goals of the event are coming through in the marketing materials.
Great. So Kayla has a question that kind of piggybacks off of Meredith's question. She's wondering if you have an example of how a marketing team or committee can make sure that they're marketing for new partnerships and individuals that have not been included in previous events and productions.
So kind of, do you mean kind of audience development or partners, or what level of, well, could you clarify what?
So while she's responding to that, I'm wondering maybe we gear this towards, because I'm hoping I might have this right. Basically, if you host or produce events, how can you make sure that you're marketing to attract new people, new groups and organizations that you haven't necessarily normally interacted with in the past?
Okay, yes. And let us know, of course, if that doesn't fit your original question, but thanks for clarifying, Kristen. That kind of goes back to your question, Kristen, about who is missing from the table. And that is, to me, is more back on the technical side of measuring success, where you get into who came to your event, who participated, as much as you know about your audience and your participation demographic-wise. So then you know who's missing, and you know if who's missing is someone that you need to reach out to, meaning that they're part of the community and they're not coming for some reason, and that most importantly, they're part of, they would be interested in the program that you're involved in. I mean, that's actually a great example of when to include the marketing person probably is how do you target outreach to new people. And again, I just kind of go back to the beginning of my process and find, even if it's like kind of on the city level of chambers of commerce, let's say, for instance, you want to engage more with people under 30, I mean, go to the Youth Chamber of Commerce. But it's just kind of those steps of relationship building that are very personal and finding people that can help spread the word for you. That's kind of how I conduct my programming, is more of on a grassroots basis, where you're helping, you're meeting individuals and really fostering relationships with those individuals to spread the word for you.
Great. I'm going to do one last call for questions. So again, if you have a question, feel free to type it into the chat box over there. And I just want to, because this is loosely connected, and I know a lot of the people on the call are from local arts agencies or organizations that actually issue funding and have a call for proposals and different things, which is definitely a type of community engagement. So I'm wondering if you have any advice in terms of when you are when you're maybe opening an RFP, or when you're opening a new grant period, or whatever might it be. And I think this is going to reinforce some of the things that you've already said, but how do you reach, again, the people that have not normally been a part of the conversation? And I'm leaning into the fact that I know historically in the arts and culture sector, we've funded the same people over and over again. And part of that problem is just that those are the people that know about what we have and what we have to offer. And so I apologize if that's a really loaded question, but I'm just curious if you have any other kind of like tips and advice of how to reach out when you have, you know, a skill or something that you're looking to engage artists or arts organizations in your community. How can you reach beyond the people that you've talked to on a normal basis?
Yes, that's a great question. And as I mentioned in the beginning, as I grew in my career and realized and started building my own personal mission statement, how important that was to me. And I have recently spoken up on issues such as that with this Inclusion Writers initiative that I'm involved in. I went directly to the Arts Commission within the City of Austin. And now, not directly as a result of anything I said per se, but that Cultural Arts Division is doing a lot of great work. They've hired a consultant, and they're really evaluating everything they do as a granting organization outreach-wise. One dream I have for arts organizations across the United States is to see more community engagement roles within staff and within city governments, especially if they're granting organizations. Because having that person separate from your marketing communication team, separate from your event production team, this whole role is to get out there and meet these people and to look at every piece of marketing material and you know, RFP, like you mentioned, that's going out, and to see if the application itself is accessible, if the language fits the different types of communities in that city. Someone that can help look at that, because I totally understand. My whole world is deadlines and timelines, and I know when you have to hit something, you have to hit something, and you're up against, you know, putting something out on your website. But again, if it doesn't connect with people, you're not going to get the results you want. So taking that time, which is extremely challenging in bureaucratic settings, I'm aware of, but taking that time to pass it around your team and maybe even outside your team if you're able to make sure it's going to work for everyone. Again, making those connections with those people so that they can help you get the word out about your RFP. You can't do it all by yourself, which is my point about asking for help early and often.
Great. So Dee has a question. Dee's wondering, do you have any guidelines for budgeting for events, especially the community engagement components of them?
Yeah. I don't have set guidelines that I could share with you, but I would say, the way that I usually quote things when I'm very first working with a new client or organization is by how much time I think it's going to take. That can be really hard to gauge when you're connecting with the community for the first time. But I would think, I sometimes ask to take a look at a larger section of an organization's budget to see what their goals are. I can see a lot from their budgets and see what their goals are as far as marketing and advertising and where they're putting their money in that sense, and then sort of maybe shift some things around to put some more time and money into community engagement, and perhaps hiring someone, a consultant for that. it's hard to say because every program is so different and you're all in different stages, but if you're not connecting with the people that you want to be connecting with yet, and perhaps you haven't even met them, then you need to back up from getting into spending all the money on the events and the advertising, and instead, like, carve out a chunk. Sometimes there's grants just for, marketing and outreach, and put $3,000 to $5,000, maybe more, maybe less, to that time and effort, and then kind of separate that out from the event production is what I recommend.
Great. Sorry, I'm trying to avoid the sirens that are going on in the background, which is why I'm trying to not unmute myself. Okay, so we don't actually have any more questions in the chat box. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up. Sarah, actually, do you want to advance to the next slide? I believe you have information in there.
There we go.
So if you want to reach out to Sarah, please feel free. Ooh. Oh, that's really weird. Something really weird just came through the chat box. So I apologize if you got a weird thing through the chat box. If you would like to connect with Sarah, please feel free to connect with her either on social media, or her email is right there on the screen. I want to thank Sarah and thank all of you guys for tuning into today's webinar, Connecting Communities Through Events. Just a quick reminder that this webinar was recorded and will be available for replay in 24 to 48 hours. We're also going to be uploading the slide deck for you, so be sure to check back onto the event page where you registered for that. Also be sure to visit us at artsu.americansforthearts.org to view other training opportunities and resources. Thank you again, everyone.
Thank you so much, and feel free to connect by those methods. I'm always available.